Hello, and welcome to The Nucleus, a podcast series by Regeneron, where we discuss science that fascinates and intrigues us. I'm Dr. Henry Way, Head of Development Innovation at Regeneron. On this podcast, we explore the topic of clinical trials, which are how Regeneron translates our science to medicine. I'm thrilled to be joined by Ken Getz, Executive Director of the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development and a research professor at the Tufts University School of Medicine. He is also founder and board chair of the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, or CISCRP. Ken has spent decades studying how clinical trials are designed, conducted, managed, and experienced, and he's been a tireless advocate for patients and research participants. On today's episode, we'll dive into the future of clinical trials, including your work with sponsors to understand the challenges and how to overcome them, from what's changing, what still needs to change, and how we can leverage technology to make them more efficient. Ken, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Henry. My pleasure to be here.
So Ken, you've dedicated your career to studying clinical research. Can you tell us a little bit about what first drew you to this work and the role you play today at Tufts in shaping how the industry approaches drug development?
It's a great place to start. I have always had a love of science, and in fact was looking to move perhaps into the practice of medicine and medical research while I was in college. And then I got really into the intersection of science and business. So looking at the economics of science and about organizational and human behavior and how it supports the process of scientific innovation and care delivery. And that once I caught that bug, it was really hard not to move in that direction. So after college, I ended up in management consulting. And because of that love of the intersection of science and business, I started getting pulled into pharmaceutical R&D, where there were ample opportunities, obviously, to look at the process of innovation and identify ways to make it more efficient, to speed it up. So it was just a really rich area for someone with my interest to start collecting data that might inform how to do the process better.
Well, listen, I'm a family member of folks who have volunteered for multiple clinical trials. I personally always believe that volunteering for a trial is maybe one of the most generous acts that a patient can make. But too often, participants feel like data points instead of partners. From your research, what are most effective ways to solidify patients as true collaborators in the research process?
It's probably at the heart of a lot of the work that we do at CISCRP as well, because at a foundational level, it's many of the things that we know are critical to any partnership, right? There has to be trust. There has to be transparency and openness. There has to be this sense that we're listening to feedback and making compromises and even concessions to accommodate the other party. And of course, there has to be respect. That's at the foundational level. Then there are just so many other areas. For example, patients don't know that clinical research is not integrated into clinical care.
They don't. Yeah, you're right.
The assumption is that your physician knows what's happening in clinical research related to their disease condition. There are just so many areas where the lack of transparency, poor education and expectation setting compromises the quality of the partnership.
Interesting. So along those lines, clinical trial protocols today are more complex than ever. They're driven by narrower patient populations and increasingly rich data collection. There's a sign of scientific progress, but it also creates real operational strain. From your perspective, how do we strike the right balance between advancing scientific precision and keeping trials practical, scalable, and accessible?
Right. It really ties in nicely with the question you asked a moment ago. There are a whole series of trade-offs that have to be made. There are trade-offs between doing great science and doing feasible science, doing great science and science that doesn't present all of this burden for a participant in a trial. And complexity has really elevated the level of burden, both for our sites and our patients. Most patients, when they understand the primary outcomes of the study and what specific procedures need to be performed, they can get on board. But we often don't really help them understand the full expectations and the purpose of the research. So that's part of it. Within companies, it's that trade-off, though, acknowledging that although we'd love to collect as much data as possible, not all data is relevant to demonstrating our primary objectives and endpoints, and we have to be more sensitized to the burden that we create for the sites that are administering our protocols and for the patients who are really putting in so much time and effort to adhere to the protocol requirements.
Thanks. I think that's right. Along those lines, your group has done some amazing work at actually developing benchmark-based analyses with real deep data from multiple sponsors, multiple studies, in-depth protocol and schedule of events or schedule activities benchmarking. So along those lines, how might we together in, say, pre-competitive collaborations be able to collect and benchmark even more protocol designs? Are there any standards, consortia, other technologies that may be emerging that can help with this on a cross-industry or clinical trials enterprise level?
There are so many, and we believe that the pre-competitive level may be the best way to influence individual companies. Often sort of an external, more robust empirical assessment helps to persuade and address some of the internal dynamics. And there are many. There are groups that are gathering data from clinicaltrials.gov and publicly available data sources. There are all kinds of benchmark consortia now. At the Tufts Center, almost every 5 years, we do a big working group study, 25, 30 companies. And I can tell there's relief in participating, being able to commiserate, but also to aggregate and de-identify the data. And then organizations bring that back to personalize it, if you will, or to make sure it's relevant to their organization. That process, and I think this is what your question was getting at, has been pretty labor intensive. Coding a protocol to gather benchmark data and going to multiple sources to get performance metrics and quality metrics is such a labor of love. I'm amazed that companies are committed to and passionate about gathering it. Yeah. But now we're seeing more of an emphasis on using digitized protocols or approaches where you can leverage analytics and AI-enabled tools to better integrate and gather data. So it feels like a unique moment in time where we may see even more of this pre-competitive collaboration.
Along those lines, my role at Regeneron is largely about bringing and evaluating new technologies into clinical development. AI is one part of that, but there are many others. You recently contributed to a really interesting DIA and Tufts study on how AI may be able to support drug development. From your perspective, then, what's the realistic role of new technologies in improving trials today, particularly AI, and what challenges do you think we need to keep in mind?
Yeah. The word realistic is the one that gives me the most pause, because in most organizations, I know that you encounter this, the advent of an innovation creates so much buzz, and often there are champions and pioneers in the organizations who would really like to move forward at a very fast pace. But the internal dynamics, the internal resistance is often the hard part to really overcome. And let's face it, this is such a risk-averse industry. We've invested so much in a program that there are those who are really unwilling to deploy some of these innovations on their program. They'd rather see it deployed elsewhere. So it's those issues that we have to overcome. I often think of the Gartner hype cycle, right, where there's this period of irrational exuberance, and then as organizations become more familiar using a technology, they hit a point where they realize can be used in many ways, but in others, we've got to figure out how to integrate it into our processes. I would say AI-enabled tools is really a unique environment for us to be innovating, because it now can address process areas that were so limited by human capacity. So I'm more excited about what role AI may play if we can overcome a lot of the internal dynamics.
Yeah, right on. So, we're at an interesting juncture now. It's to exactly your point. There's a lot of opportunity, but this innovation, these innovative tools, they don't really mean as much without solid execution. What do you see in terms of that work that with the benchmark and elsewhere, examples of innovations already delivering efficiency and quality in trials?
We are finding that nearly all of the most buzzworthy innovations are all delivering efficiency and speed. But they're usually supported by case examples or benchmarks where, when there's resistance, many can point to the sample and say, well, this does not necessarily relate to our experience. So we always have to look for even more robust data sets in order to, and we have to really point to very specific case examples. It really speaks to this pre-competitive environment where companies need to share more of their experience, and we need to constantly update it. We do our part at the Tufts Center, but we're looking for even more of those types of consortia to really convey the impact that we're seeing. The AI use case study, which was very early stage, we were already detecting accelerated timelines.
Oh, wow.
And these were from very early stage pilot usage of some of these AI-enabled approaches.
As someone who works inside of a sponsor organization, I know how much responsibility we carry in trial design and in execution. You've also co-authored studies with your group that look at site burden, clinical trial site burden. What are some of the most promising ways that sponsors can support more effective, inclusive, and patient-friendly trials, particularly when it comes to partnering with clinical trial sites?
Yeah, it's really such an important way that we need to frame all of our design decisions, right? Really understanding how every element of the protocol might impact the site's ability to feasibly execute the protocol. I would say that the area where we've seen the most promise has been some of the virtual and remote approaches. Although sites recognize that it may elevate burden, right? They often have to act as a help desk. The fact that it provides greater convenience for their volunteers, it's improved access and therefore proportional representation by race and ethnicity has been a huge benefit for sites. We've done studies looking at the home delivery of investigational drug. And we've shown that it ultimately accelerates timelines. And although it creates more effort for the site, they know that patients are more receptive to those kinds of trials. They are more satisfied with their participation. So in a lot of ways, what the site burden and patient burden, often there's an interplay there and a willingness to support those approaches. One other point I want to make is that many sites have actually deployed their own remote and virtual technologies. Many waited for sponsors to come forward, or they realized that the sponsor's wearable device or telemedicine application was not as integrated into their offerings as their own. And so there's a real opportunity for sites to play an active part as the investor and provider of some of the virtual and remote solutions that are already integrated into their electronic medical records, for example.
Excellent. I tend to agree with that. Sites have really embraced various types of technologies across the board to make their lives easier as well and more efficient. So along those lines, I mean, we're talking about sites. hard to define what a site is anymore. We talk about doing better with both quote unquote traditional and non-traditional sites and networks, but putting aside definitional issues, what have you seen that really works, and where do we still have room to elevate or improve ourselves?
Yeah, the place that most impresses us is in the world of fit for purpose. And that concept applies at every level of trial execution today. So we know, for example, that Asian patients tend to be more receptive to use of telemedicine and certain virtual approaches, whereas patients who identify as Black or African American do not. Their preferences tend to favor local labs or tend to favor ways of shortening the distance between the site and their home. So all of this just suggests that we almost have to treat every trial as a custom design experiment, right? Where we're trying to find the right mix of technologies that support our sites and our patients, that meet the preferences and needs by disease condition, by demographic characteristic.
Yeah.
It's going to be a much more complex environment in the future. And part of the challenge is how do you optimize that so that we still are able to have feasible trials that lower and recognize the burden that our sites and our patients are bearing.
Sounds like you're getting at not just fit for purpose, but fit for patient. Maybe
Right.
is kind of the term here. This has been great, Ken. Before we wrap, what's ahead? Are there any upcoming studies or emerging trends you're watching right now that you think will shape the next chapter of clinical research and clinical trials?
There are many. The Tufts Center could spend all of its time just updating previous studies.
Yep.
We have a lot of benchmark data, but there are a couple of areas that are on our radar. Of course, really gathering more empirical data on AI-enabled approaches, generative and agentic AI in particular. There's more centralization that we're seeing, especially the study monitoring and data collection is becoming more centralized and remote and risk-based. That's sort of an exciting trend where we think that there could be a lot of inherent improvement, reducing the number of monitoring visits, for example, accelerating the time to access the data and identify patterns in the data. And clearly AI may play a role there as well. Many sponsors are looking at the intersection and integration of clinical care and clinical research. How can clinical care infrastructure and the rich data that is gathered routinely during patient care be better leveraged to support clinical research? And how do you create almost this continuous feedback loop between clinical care and clinical research? So we're seeing more in that area.
Oh, well, Ken, thank you so much for joining me. Your work has given the industry hard data and evidence and a compass for how we can do better. For me, our conversation reinforces a simple truth. Clinical trials are about advancing science, but they're about real people.
Yes.
And we owe it to them to design research that's inclusive, efficient, respectful of their time, and designed for maximum impact. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And most importantly, thank you to the patients and the families who make progress possible. I'm Henry Way, and we look forward to seeing you next time on The Nucleus by Regeneron.